The Exchange on Deep Dive.
The beautiful sounds there of none other than Feli Nandi. Hanzi mutiwa temwa. Haukanganwi hazidemo ndiro rinotema. This evening we are getting into our discussion on the exchange. And it really, I mean, when you look at the story, you know, and I mean, Fidelis Mnyoro, good job, I mean, on how heartfelt this article was. But he's a courtroom reporter with our sister publication, The Herald. And he was reporting on a particular case, and the title of his story says it all: sad, but it's justice anyway. So we're spotlighting on a recent incident that happened in Chinhoyi that saw a child committing the greatest criminal act there is against another child. So a boy aged somewhere between 15 and 17. And when we connect with our guests, we'll also look at how courts estimate age stood accused of ending the life of a 14-year-old girl, and the circumstances around it. It's a village situation. They start making fun of him. So there were a group of girls, including the now deceased, innocent laughter that probably riled him up, and he then reacted. He felt cornered, took out a knife. They started hitting each other. Next thing, a knife that then stabbed this girl. So it really was a very sad case. This young girl lost her life. This young boy stood accused of murder. So he was convicted, but the judge echoed that a child is a child, and a child who carried burdens far too heavy for his small shoulders, and that he was forced to grow up too soon. The judge also said he's not a hardened criminal. There is no cunningness or pretense in him, only the innocence of a boy out of his depth. And as such, he was sentenced to a rehabilitation, so 3 years of rehabilitation. We want to talk about this as well as highlight various issues coming out of this case, as well as what they reflect on society. Joining me in the conversation, happy to welcome legal practitioner, child and human rights advocate, also a notary public and conveyancer, Pamela Msimwa. We will also hear the voice of Rufaro Mandu, legal practitioner and expert in this conversation as well. Pamela, good evening and welcome.
Evening, Rombi. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
It's always a pleasure, Pamela. I'm great. Trying to stay warm, but otherwise, all is well.
Thank you.
Good. Pamela, we have you this evening to talk about this issue. I mean, let's give us an overview of this particular case. I mean, there's a lot of things coming out of it that we want to break down. But what's your general overview before we deep dive into some of the other aspects here?
Thank you so much. So in this particular case, I actually see a judge or a justice system that is protecting children. A justice system that is acknowledging that children who commit offenses are actually children in need of care. A justice system that actually appreciates that there is a juvenile justice system which is separate from the normal criminal justice system. And in that juvenile justice system, children, the focus should be on rehabilitation and reintegration rather than on punishment. So basically, I see a development that we are taking as a nation, especially in the justice system, and I see a development that we eventually adopt even when we are dealing with our children. And I foresee children who are given a second chance having a better future rather than where we have been before. So basically, this is the analysis that I have. I believe that indeed children commit different offenses, but they really need to be given that second chance.
I totally hear you, Pamela, but many will rush to say, what about the victim? And justice for the victim, particularly here because it's a child who's committed an offense against another child and the state, of course, but let's look at that, particularly how society will see this.
Okay, thank you so much for that one. So, as you have already highlighted, I'm a child rights advocate, and I look at both sides. So in this particular case that we have at hand, the child has not been released freely. He has not been told that you have not committed an offense, you can go and commit other offenses. In fact, he has been convicted, and he stands convicted. which means automatically that he has a criminal record, and indeed he has not been released back into the society. He has been placed in a rehabilitation institute for 3 years. So basically, when we are dealing with children, indeed we are very sorry for the child who has died. But at the end of the day, there is really nothing that can be done that will then maybe restore the life of that child who has died. It's very unfortunate that this has happened. But at the end of the day, we are saying that this particular child who is still there, he should be rehabilitated such that he won't be a menace again in the society. So what we usually see when we are dealing with children in conflict with the law, there is that danger that we might treat them in such a way that they will become hardcore criminals. So the juvenile justice system is just there to ensure that we do not have hardcore criminals, or we do not create hardcore criminals through the justice system. And for the parents, or for those whose child has died, I think it would be best for them to actually understand the system at hand. That this particular accused person or this particular juvenile has not been said that he has not committed an offense. Indeed, he has committed an offense. And in fact, he has been removed from the society for 3 years. And that on itself is actually something that the court should be applauded for.
Interesting indeed. And you did talk about there being a shift. I mean, almost celebrating this judgment, as a landmark one, for child's rights. Let's talk about the rehabilitation system or that option that is there for juvenile offenders that sees them, not being sentenced to custodial sentences and offering them a second chance, as it were. Is this happening, as a yardstick? Is there room for it in the law, or this is the first of, or this is a judgment that's coming out of an ideal and not something that actually exists in our law currently?
All right, thank you so much. So basically, we have the laws. The laws are there. Let's look at the Constitution. The Constitution, Section 81. Is very clear. It actually says when a child when a child has been arrested, incarceration should be a measure of last resort. And if at any point in time the court decides to incarcerate a child, there are certain conditions that should be followed. Number one, they should be incarcerated for the shortest period possible. The incarceration should not involve mixing that child together with adults, and that child should be kept in conditions that take into consideration the child's age. And when we actually look at the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act, it has certain provisions that deal with juveniles. We can look at Section 351. It actually deals with juveniles when they have been convicted. What should happen? They should be given a second chance. We can actually look at Section 151. It actually deals with how children who have been arrested should be treated in a way that should take in consideration of their age. For example, they should be released into the custody of the Department of Social Welfare. They should be released into the custody of their guardian. They should be even they can be released freely without paying any money. So the juvenile justice system is there, but unfortunately it's fragmented. The laws are fragmented. They are not in one statute. So at the end of the day, the challenge that we have been having on the ground is that different courts dealt differently with each and every juvenile. So when a court is faced with a juvenile, depending on where the court is, the sentence will be different. So basically, those were some of the challenges that we have been having. But because of this judgment, it's a judgment that is coming from a higher court, and we believe that because of this judgment, there will be a bit of uniformity. Because obviously, if a higher court comes up with a judgment, it becomes the precedent. It will be quoted in all the lower courts. So basically, we are celebrating this judgment because it is actually stamping what we believe should be the practice rather than the theory. At the end of the day, we are now seeing the practicality of the court now dealing with what should happen. And yes, I have been dealing with different cases of children. The courts have been trying to ensure that children are rehabilitated. But the main challenge are resources. You realize that there is an institute that is there, but there are challenges with that particular institute. Maybe the resources are not adequate for rehabilitating a juvenile. And even the institutions that are there, they are few. For example, in Harare, there are only about 2 to 3 institutes. But considering the various incidents of children coming into conflict with the law, there might be need of more institutions. And you can also, we are also realizing that many children who are coming into conflict with the law, I think you have already asked that question with regards to how then should a child in conflict with the law be viewed. Usually many of these children, they are children in need of care. Look at this particular child. He is a child who has been exposed to vulnerability. No parents. He was looking after his younger brother, and he was not even going to school. So at the end of the day, the circumstances surrounding these cases actually affect how then they react or they actually act in the various communities that they are in.
Quite a lot to process, Pam, as you are saying that. So one might be very quick to ask that, the resources that are used in these rehabilitation centers, where do they come from? Is this also coming from the state? And let's look at the resource argument or the resource challenge that you spoke about.
Okay. So basically, these institutions that I'm talking about, they are state institutions for rehabilitation of juveniles. So basically, most of the resources, they are coming from the state. But unfortunately, the institutions are not well-resourced. There is one institution that I know which is very porous. You place a child there, tomorrow that child would have already run away. So, for example, today I actually asked for this child to be released into the custody of the Department of Social Development. They then place that child in that particular institution. The next court date, the child would no longer be there. And it becomes a challenge at the end of the day because we would not have succeeded in rehabilitating that juvenile. So at the end of the day, the institutions are there, they are state funded, but they are not well resourced.
Let's take it a little bit deeper and talk about, the impact of this sentence on the community and the victim's family. Now, I know that there's also a process of getting, an impact report and, looking into how crimes, particularly the ones of murder, impact a community and the family. How will this impact the community and the victim's family?
Okay, obviously they have been greatly impacted by this offense in the sense that they have lost a child. And this child, there is no possibility that this child will then come back to the society. In fact, when I was going through the case and actually listening to the victim impact statement by the father of the child, he was actually stating that I have lost a child who had a great future. Obviously, that is going to affect him. Even the community itself is going to be affected by this crime. But at the end of the day, I think it's high time that the community is made aware that children remain children. I think the judge clearly quoted it well, that even though a child commits an offense, it does not necessarily then render that child an adult. They remain a child. And I think it's high time that the community knows that even to such an extent that even when a child commits an offense, when they attend court, they have that at the back of their mind, that a child does not cease to be a child because they have committed an offense. Usually, what I have seen when I'm representing these cases, there is that attitude that the community has. Even some justice players have that same attitude, where they believe that a child ceases to be a child because they have committed an offense, or a child becomes an adult because they reasoned to such an extent that they commit an offense. But the judge clearly pointed out, which is very correct, and I agree with the judge, that a child does not cease to be a child because they have committed an offense. They deserve to be given a second chance, and there is hope that they can change, regardless of the nature of the crime and how the crime has impacted the community.
Throughout, the reasoning, the ratio of the judgment and so on, Pamela, there's a lot of emphasis on mukomana uyu kwaakabva magariro aiita. What's the importance of addressing those underlying issues and even digging into aya atinozonzi mitigatory factors? What's the importance of that, asking kuti akabva kupi ari kurarama sei, and why does the court ask those sorts of questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Rumbi. So you realize that when you are looking at juveniles who commit offenses, rarely does a juvenile commit an offense merely because they love to commit that offense. When you look at a juvenile who has committed an offense, if you do not dig deeper, you might see a criminal. But if you dig deeper, you might realize that there might be other circumstances that might have forced that child to act as he or she did. So in this particular case, the judge actually took her time to go into the circumstances of the child. For example, asina vabereki ndiye angari in charge of his younger brother. Akakurumidza kukura akapiwa mitoro yevanhu vakuru iye achiri mwana mudiki. So at the end of the day, the mitigatory factors and these circumstances, they can actually guide the court with regards to why the child has acted in the manner that they would have acted. You would realize that Mazwano, in some of the cases that I deal with, besides this case, pamwe ndezerape, mwana atuda anorepa umwe mwana, wona wazobvunza unzwa kuti aiwa baba namai ndotorara nawo musame room, mwana achirara aripo, zvaari kuona ndo zvaari kunoimitata. So when you dig deeper into a child story, you would then have an appreciation of why they acted in such a manner. So basically what I have noticed in representing children is that a child who commits an offense is actually doing that because another right has been violated for that particular child. Look at this child that we are dealing with. He was not going to school. The right to education has been violated. He was looking after another child. He had no parents. So the right to parental guidance was not there. So at the end of the day, this child's rights has been violated, resulting in him violating another child's rights. Basically, this is what then guides the court on how best to come up with a rehabilitation intervention that best suits that particular child that the court would be faced with.
And, the overall decision by the judge in this case to sentence the boy, some people might say, isn't that a paradox? How do you sentence someone to rehabilitation? And is that really punishment? What do you reckon there? Some will say we've never heard of the Kadoma Training Institute. Nyaya ayatopera anakupanishwa mkomano.
All right. So the first thing that we have to understand as a community is that the juvenile justice system is not focused on punishing the offender. It's focused on rehabilitating and reintegrating the offender. So we have two different systems when we are looking at the criminal justice system. So we have the normal court, the normal criminal justice system. This is where an adult who has committed an offense, they go through this system. But then when a minor or a child or anyone below the age of 18 commits an offense, they then go through the juvenile justice system. And in this system, punishment is not the objective. The objective is rehabilitation and reintegration. Why do they do that? They are trying to give the juvenile or the child a second chance. Because at the end of the day, let's say, for example, this judge had actually sentenced this child for 3 years imprisonment, maybe at Shikurubi. By the time that those 3 years would have lapsed, that child would have become a hardcore criminal. And then that child would then go back into the community, having been taught by others in Shikurubi about how then to commit offenses without being caught. That child would become a menace. So at the end of the day, when we are looking at children, we have hope for them. We believe that there is a chance that they can become better people. That's why the juvenile justice system is focused on rehabilitation and reintegration. Besides, when I'm dealing with children, you realize that the mere fact that they have gone to court, they appeared before a judge, they have gone through the police station, and some are even remanded in custody. That experience on its own, it's actually an experience that usually teaches them that they should not commit offenses besides the sentence that they will be given by the court. So yes, I believe the juvenile justice system is focused on rehabilitation rather than on punishment. And people should understand that. It's not about punishing the juvenile. It's about rehabilitating and reintegrating the juvenile.
Yeah, pakakosha ipapo, because many people, I mean, and you hear when we open up, to our listeners, that there's a split. There are some who are saying, but is it really fair? It seems that we've ignored the victim, but I'm very happy that you are here to share the perspective. And most importantly, the point of having these systems, and the point is to rehabilitate. So Pamela Msimwa, our guest this evening, she's a child rights advocate as well as a lawyer, really zeroing in on some of those aspects. Another thing that I found very interesting, and that would be really instructive also for our listeners, is around the determination of age. Zvakakoshere ndine dzimwe nyaya dzandinombonzwa, or even some cases that you deal with, where the state will say, no, we want a birth certificate to confirm. Kana pasina birth certificate vane zvavanotoita to determine the age. Talk to us about these processes. How does a court verify the age of a juvenile offender, and why do they take so much time to verify age?
Okay, thank you so much. So basically, when I'm looking at children in conflict with the law, I'm always encouraging people who have children to register their children. Birth registration is very important. Why? Because now when a child comes into conflict with the law, the determinant factor or the definition of a child is basically determined by a birth certificate. Whether you're a child or an adult, it's the birth certificate that tells us. So if you are if we calculate your age according to your birth certificate and you are more than 18, automatically you are an adult. But then if you are less than 18, you are a child. Unfortunately, it's not easy for those who are not registered, those who do not have birth certificate. So what the court does is, if a person alleges that they are below the age of 18, but there is no birth certificate, they then give an order that that person should undergo an age estimate. So age estimation, it's an estimate. Usually, it's always done by a doctor. So in Zimbabwe, what is being done in practice is, then from mazino iwayo, they can estimate kuti munhu ane makore akati, ane 20, ane 18, ane 17, ane 14. So because it's an estimate, that's why you realize that in this particular case, they are saying this person might be aged between 15 to 17 years. It's not certain because it's an estimate. The mere fact that it's an estimate, there is no certainty. And this person could actually be 16 years, could actually be 15 years, could actually be 17 years. It's very unfortunate. They are below 18. But the estimate might actually come out to 24 years because it's merely an estimate. So the age estimate is done to determine the age of a person because it has a bearing on whether the person should be dealt with under the normal justice system or should be dealt with under the juvenile justice system.
Ndava ndavhunduka saka ndogona kutonzi 24 ndiri 16
19 age estimate. So zvakakosha kuti tigare it will be a disadvantage for a person anozoti mwana then age estimate yoya ichiti 20. It will be a very, very bad case.
Saka kutoresa vana mabirth certificate kwakakosha. Oh, very, very interesting. Let's also touch on the role that education, counseling, and community service play in the justice system when it comes to sentencing procedures. Different types of judgments, based on the unique circumstances of each case.
Okay, thank you so much. So in the cases that I have dealt with, you actually realize that this particular child committed this offense because he was idle. He is a school dropout. He has not been going to school. And in such circumstances, because you have realized that you have looked at the child's circumstances, the recommendation that will then be given maybe is to enroll that child in a particular training institute, or to actually engage the Ministry of Education together with the Department of Social Development, that the child be enrolled in BEAM and they go to school. Why? Because an idle mind is the devil's sweatshop. If then a child is not engaged through education, obviously they are then going to be engaged through illegal activities. So education is actually a protection measure for children. The more that a child attends school, or the more that children are enrolled in school, the more that they are protected. Then when you come to counseling, you realize that many people are going through traumatic experiences. Look at this particular child. He is between 15 to 17 years old, but he was already covering the burdens of adults. He was fending for his brother. The parents are nowhere to be found. Besides these things that have been highlighted, he could have been experiencing other things. So because of these traumatic experiences, it then becomes important that a person undergoes counseling. And some of these children, they commit these offenses because they lack the appreciation that is actually an offense, and even the impact of that offense to the next person, or the consequences of that offense. So through counseling, they can actually come to appreciate what their actions have done, or how they have wronged the next person. And through that appreciation, they can actually apologize for their actions. So it's important that in some cases, the court can actually give a recommendation, or can actually order that a person undergoes counseling, whether be it a child in conflict with the law, or even the victim themselves. For example, in this particular case, I actually believe that it is important that the parents of the girl that has been killed undergo counseling. Why? Because it is very important. They have gone through a traumatic experience, and they would need to heal, and counseling is part and parcel of healing. Then there is the third thing you said, education, counseling, and
community service.
And community service. So now when we look at community service, we are saying this particular person has committed an offense. There is really, when you are looking at that particular case, you might actually realize that this particular person might actually have known or appreciated the consequences of what he was doing. So when you are dealing with community service, we are talking about people who are giving back to the community. You have wronged the community, so you should give back to that same community. So a person is actually told that you must go and work at a particular school or at a particular clinic, but then depending on your availability in that area, and also your skills, then the court can then order you to do community service at any particular area. Otherwise, when you are doing community service, the court is saying you have wronged the community, so therefore you should go back and give back to that particular community for the wrong that you have done.
As you're saying that, Pam, I'm just thinking, I think, we need to be creative with our community service, because it's manual labor a lot of the time. But if someone was a painter, go and teach children. If you are singing, go and sing children. Just a side note that I was having there. To our listeners, you are locked on, and we are looking at a very sad case with sad outcomes, where a boy aged somewhere between 15 and 17, according to a medical estimate, ended the life of a 14-year-old girl in a moment of madness, and ultimately a very, very sad result. So our thoughts go to the victim's family, but we are also looking at kuzotongwa kwaita mwana yeye and why he received 3 years rehabilitation. It is punishment, it is the way in which children are dealt with, and our guest Pamela Msimwa really going into some of the sentencing procedures, and she's an expert when it comes to dealing with these cases of child or children intersecting with crime. We also are going to hear from Rufaro Mandu. She's also a lawyer. Her thoughts on this issue. But I will be opening up my phone lines. Your contributions are very welcome on 0719 100 404. So Pamela, do hang in there as we hear from Rufaro, as well as questions from our listeners. If you want to call into the studio, it's 0772 269 229 or 0772 269 0241. I'd love to hear from you on this one. So Rufaro Mandu had this to say on the issue.
Good evening, Rumbi. Good evening, listeners. It is a sad day indeed to be reading of such news in our papers. No parent wants their child to go through what this young man has gone through, and no parent would want to lose their child in such a manner. It's really sad indeed. We need to teach our children how to resolve conflict in a better way, and under these circumstances, it's even worse to learn the personal circumstance of the young man from what we are reading. One is left wondering what our society is doing to our young children. The abandonment issues and the like. It really is sad. It's sad to see a young man brushing with the law, especially under such circumstances. The loss of young life and the loss of innocence, both can never be compared. They are both immeasurable. The loss of the young girl's life, the loss of the innocence of the young men through commission of such a heinous offense. And the young man convicted by the court has lost his innocence forever. The good thing about the judgment handed down by the Honorable Court is that he has been given another chance at life. The sentencing is commendable. With young persons, it is always important to aim for a rehabilitative sentence. Section 351 of our Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act empowers our courts to liaise with the Department of Social Welfare Services in Zimbabwe to ascertain availability of a rehabilitation institution to place the child under rehabilitation program for a period that the court determines in consultation with the probation officer's report, and to determine the suitability of the time frame that the court has to consider. So it's good to see that this is exactly what the court did in this instance. And certainly it is commendable to see a court being in line with the laws that are already existing. We are hopeful that the young person will be reformed and he will reflect and have a new lease of life. And hopefully also us as the general public, we're also learning from this case the repercussions of child abandonment, the repercussions of how we raise our children and everything surrounding their upbringing. So hopefully we have learned something from this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rufaro. Quite a solemn note there, and it really is sad. But thanks so much for your views on that one, and definitely resonating with Pamela saying it is a triumph. Actually, kana makotse dashoda isobos mtemo wacho report kutofara kuti urikushandiswa. Our questions from our listeners. This one is for you, Pam. It says, "Hi, Ruby and Pamela. I guess my contribution is more related to the social service side. I think there should be an investigation on the family background of this killer child. Maybe there is instability of some sort in the family for him to be able to take a knife and stab someone. At the same time, the family of the boy would need to pay restitution to the girl's family because ngozi inongo despite the age of the offender." So that's one. Here's a second one. Then I'll just ask you to answer those together as we wrap up. So this one is from Sydney, Mkoma, Sydney. These are his thoughts.
How are you, Sisi Rumbi? What a sad story. It's a very sad story. Very sad story. Ndanzwa kunyatsobatikana. But pane issue one ka imini Sisi Rumbi muri munhu wewe anonyatsoziva mutemo. 3 years ari kurehabilitation. Azvigone here nhaye vedu we kuti kungonzi vana vapara mhosva dzakaita saizvozvo idzo vasaendeswe kuma-rehabilitation centers akaita saiwayo. Because ikoko vachasangana nevamwe vanhu vaane chibhanditi chekuti misikanzwa yavo iyoyo inogona kutowedzera. Tichifunga kuti ari pa-rehabilitation center, but misikanzwa yacho inogona kutowedzera. It's not like I see juvenile prisons here amuri kutaura nezvavo iwayo. I think vanofana kungopiwa counseling chaivo kana machichis anofana kuintervena paissue yakadaro iyoyo. Wonyatsokanselwa vari kumba vangogara as usual vari mumafamilies avo iwayo. Handisi kukurudzira zvaitwa vana vadiki vane misikanzwa. But I think kungoti vapiwe counseling vari mumafamilies avo than kuti aende kuma-juvenile prisons.
Thanks so much, Mkoma Sydney. Just looking at our time, I'll give you just a moment to respond. Mazvinzwa izvo, Sisi Pam Hanzi, but 3 years, surely. And also you heard some of those views around, the social welfare aspect. In closing and in just addressing those issues, Pam.
Thank you so much. So basically, I'm actually liking that our communities actually have a different perspective with regards to these rehabilitation institutes. They are specifically designed for juvenile offenders. And unfortunately now, because the court has to balance the interest of the complainant and that of the accused person, they cannot just say, because after somebody has committed this type of offense, go home and live as you were living. Plus, looking at the circumstances of this particular child, telling him to go back home would actually be telling him to go and commit other offenses. Because remember, kumba hakuna vabereki, kumba hakuna anochengeta. Vana vari kugara vega in a child-headed family. He was the parent to the other child. So now telling the child to go back home would be actually looking the other way at the needs of this particular child. So the court was actually trying to address the needs of this child when they actually sent him to the rehabilitation institute, because but indeed the concerns are very valid. Then with regards to issue here, social services, it's very correct. There is need for restitution now in this particular circumstance. Because he can't restitute anyone. And usually when you are looking at the criminal law, restitution is done by the person who has committed the offense. So basically, at the end of the day, looking at this, at the particular circumstances of the case, this particular child cannot restitute. The parents are not there to restitute. But if I believe this is what then pushed the court to come up with the final decision that it had in this case. Then finally, I think it's very important that as a community, we appreciate that children are committing offenses. But basically, the fault always comes back to us as a community. Why? Because when you look closely at children who commit offenses, they are committing offenses because their rights would have been violated. As parents, let's not neglect our children. As communities, let's not neglect our children. Let's be there to guide them and give them proper parental guidance in everything that they are doing. Let's try the rights of children are upholded, the right to education, the right to health, etc., etc. Thank you so much, Rumbi.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Have a good night, and thank you so much for your time. That's Pamela Msimwa, the child rights advocate and legal practitioner, lending her voice to us. And of course, many thanks to Rufaro Mandu and to you for being part of the conversation. It is 8 o'clock, time for the news.